James Sherk is on the line with us. He's a research fellow and senior policy analyst in labor economics at the Heritage Foundation. Heritage.org is the website. James, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
The president is arguing for a gradual raise over a number of years to $10.10 an hour for the minimum wage. My understanding is that that's the point at which the Walmart, McDonald's business model of have the federal government cover most of the costs of your workers starts to fall apart, because at that level, people no longer qualify for food stamps and a lot of things. A number of politicians are calling for $12 an hour. Phased in over a 5 or 10 year period. Others are calling for $15 an hour. Has there ever been a time in American history when increasing, and by the way, the minimum wage right now would be in the neighborhood of $12 an hour if it was inflation adjusted since 1968, and if it was productivity adjusted, it would be over $20 an hour right now. Has there ever been a time in American history when raising the minimum wage has caused the GDP to go down? I can't find one.
Well, I want to correct you on a few points there. On the issue of the Walmart being covered by food stamps and the like, and their wages, this is actually something that Jason Furman, who's the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Obama, obviously, has written pointing out, saying this simply isn't the case. That the overwhelming consensus of the academic research that's been done finds that the existence of food stamps and Medicaid and WIC and all these government welfare benefits tend to reduce the labor supply. That is, they tend to make people less likely to work, and so
I'm not buying it.
Well,
I'm not buying it. I don't think that there's anybody out there who would, you may have a small percentage, 1 or 2%, who are suffering from some kind of mental illness, and you've got people who are disabled or toward the end of their working lives who would love to get out of the workforce. But I'm not buying it. I've heard that. I heard that argument from Ronald Reagan. I heard that argument from Bill Clinton. And every time we tried to cut back on those programs and things, it didn't suddenly increase employment. Employment is driven by demand, as you well know, and demand is called wages. If you increase wages and you put that money not in the pockets of people like the Koch brothers, who are just going to stash in a Swiss bank account, but you put it in the pockets of working people, they're going to spend 100% of it. That's going to increase demand in the economy, which is going to increase employment.
Well, I'm telling you that the academic debate on this it's a question of how much does it reduce labor supply.
It doesn't.
Is it a little? Is it a lot?
No, it doesn't. Every single time the minimum wage has been raised since 1935, it has been followed by an increase in GDP. Every single time.
Again, with respect to the welfare programs, this is what I'm talking about here. Jason Furman, you can point to Aaron Dubé, who's one of the champions for arguing the minimum wage.
If that's true, James, would you support a program that says that companies can no longer pay? I mean, are you really trying to suggest to me that a person who works a 40-hour week at Walmart or at McDonald's does not qualify for supplemental assistance of any kind?
What I'm arguing is that Walmart pays higher wages because of the existence of those supplemental programs.
No.
Again, it's very clear. Look, this is an argument that's persuasive to Jason Furman, that is persuasive to Aaron Dubé, one of the champions.
Well, my argument is persuasive to Robert Reich, who was the former Secretary of Labor for the Clinton administration. It's persuasive to Joe Stiglitz, who's one of the most respected economists in the world. If you want to have dueling economists, I think I've got some names that are more recognizable than yours.
Well, there's two different.
But let's talk about the principles here. Let's talk about the principles. Why are you opposed to raising the minimum wage?
Because it will hurt the people it's intended to benefit.
Where is the example of that in history?
Well, I'll give you two examples here. Now, I'll preface this by saying that very often, the minimum wage increases we've seen mostly in the U.S. have been relatively small. Say from going from $5.15 an hour to $6.50 an hour. There's not an awful lot of people back when you had a $5.15 minimum wage who were making that or were making $6.50, and so minimum wage increases tend to affect relatively few people. And so I'd say there's a small effect, but you don't see an overwhelming effect. But when we've had big minimum wage increases, minimum wage increases that have affected a lot of people. You've seen a lot of economic pain. Example A would be what happened to Puerto Rico. In the 1970s, Puerto Rico got connected to the federal minimum wage, despite having incomes that are roughly a third that of here on the mainland. Now, did this lead to general prosperity? Did this lead to greater wealth? Did it lead to an economic flourishing for the island economy? Unfortunately, it didn't. What happened was their total employment fell by about 9%.
Over what period of time?
This was from between, it was basically the early 80s. So
because
I want to say from 79.
Because my understanding of what has happened in Puerto Rico is that we were giving, the United States government, that we were giving corporations basically the ability to not have to pay taxes if they moved their manufacturing facilities to Puerto Rico. And that's why virtually all of the pharmaceutical industry had moved to Puerto Rico. And then that either expired or was repealed sometime in the last 6 or 8 years. And now those companies have moved their operations out of Puerto Rico. And as a result, Puerto Rico's tax base has shrunk because the decent manufacturing jobs there are gone. That it was essentially a variation on trade policy.
So, in terms of what's been going on recently, sure, that's the case. I wouldn't say that the minimum wage is the only reason Puerto Rico's in the trouble it is. There's a lot of things, but you go back to the early '80s when they pushed through the massive minimum wage hike, and that's when you saw the massive exodus of Puerto Ricans, primarily to New York, some more recently to Miami. But what happened was a lot of these lower skilled Puerto Ricans just couldn't find jobs in Puerto Rico, and that's they have U.S. citizenship, and so they were able to move to New York without.
So you're telling me the companies went out of business in Puerto Rico as a result of the minimum wage increase? I see no evidence of that.
Well, their employment dropped by 9%. 1 out of every 11 jobs in Puerto Rico went away. I mean, that's a pretty large effect. And this was by Harvard economist Richard Freeman, who analyzed this.
There's got to be, well, okay, we're not talking about Puerto Rico here. We're talking about the United States, the richest country on earth. Here's the fundamental issue. Why should, in the United States of America, why should anybody who works a 40-hour week have to live in poverty?
Well, the fact of the matter is there's relatively few minimum wage workers who are actually living in poverty.
Well, you and I both know that's true, but it's also not true. If you take from the minimum wage to about $1.50 above the minimum wage, that encompasses a hell of a lot of people. Let's refer generally to minimum wage workers as people earning under $10 an hour, okay? In that case, you're talking about a huge cohort of the American population who are earning less than, in 1968, all minimum wage earners earned, because if you take in $68 and inflation adjust them to today, the minimum wage in 1968 was $12 an hour.
That's not true, unfortunately. Or it will, fortunately or unfortunately, that's simply not true. The problem with that there is you're using the less accurate measure of inflation to do that inflation adjustment.
Well, let's say it was $11 an hour then. It was still more than $7.25.
If you look at the Congressional Budget Office report that they did about a year ago, they used what's widely regarded as a more accurate measure of inflation. It's called the Personal Consumption Expenditure
and that would have
Index. And under that deflation, just look at their chart. Look at the front chart on the report. Just Google Congressional Budget Office report, and you don't see the minimum wage ever getting anywhere close to $12 an hour.
So what was it?
It was about $8.50 an hour in 1968.
So from 1968 to today, we've seen so little inflation that $7.25, that something back then that cost $7.25 would only cost $8.50 now.
No,
the minimum wage back then
was about $1.90 an hour. Using the more accurate measures of inflation, that adjusts into about $8.50 in today's dollars. The actual minimum wage was about $1.90.
Right. Okay, we're in the weeds here. Again, to the question, why should anybody? Oh, we're out of time. James Sherk. An interesting conversation. A research fellow, senior policy analyst in labor economics at the Heritage Foundation, heritage.org. Thank you for coming on the program today, James.
Thank you.